Thank you, Michelle, for closing the doors. Welcome, everyone. Well, I have some exciting news. I'm your new CEO. Thank you. Don't worry, Bill is just at the hair salon getting his hair done. He'll be back. I am not your CEO, I promise. Don't worry, you're in good hands with Bill still. I just have one announcement, and I would like to call Allie Kluth up here. She's talking to Robin McCosey. Allie, come on up, Allie. Allie's our MVP this month. So I call her Allie with the pretty red hair, because then there's Allie Olson, who is the administrator, not to be confused. So Dolly Dolly, what's the word I'm looking for? Nominated, thank you. Nominated, and so I'll just read Dolly's words. Allie has been an instrumental person in getting our online MARS, which is the medical electronic program, up and running, from inputting medications, double checking the online system, and all other factors that are involved with inputting information into Matrix. Allie also has been doing this while maintaining residence care, assisting mobile primary, doing rounds, and all of her daily roles that Allie does. And she's happy to take on this new MARS system. Plus, Allie is always looking for ways to improve the nursing department and to ensure the best resident care and consistency among the nursing staff. Allie has gone above and beyond, and she couldn't be more grateful for Allie. But Allie also has been promoted to the nursing supervisor. Wow. For the assisted living. So that's also really exciting for Allie. She'll do great. Did you want to say anything? No? Well, great job.
I'm appreciative, thank you.
And Wendy and Pierre will get you all your goodies for being MVP. So congratulations, Allie. So those were all of our announcements. Are there any resident announcements? Janice has one. Okay. Get your phone out, watch out. Okay, hold on.
Okay, I just want to mention that on September 6th at 9 o'clock before coffee hour, the 6th and the 20th, Marja, Jan, and a few others are going to have an open registration for voting this November. So if you've moved in and you haven't registered yet, or you want to change your affiliation, or if you, whatever you want to do, absentee ballots, and if you would like to do that, come on September 6th at 9 o'clock. We'll be here outside these doors. Thank you.
Thank you. September 6th and September 20th.
Yes.
Those are both Fridays, September 6th and September 20th. Before coffee hour, bright and early. Okay, we have one more announcement back here.
No, you don't have to come.
Oh, okay, that's all.
All I'm reminding everyone of is the little tabs that are on top of the cans, beer cans, pop cans. It hit me this morning that I don't know about patio homes and what they do with those tabs. I would urge everyone, even in the patio homes, if you do it, soup cans, any can that has a tab, take it off, just collect them in a little plastic bag, and then bring them over. You can stick them in my box. The money and its weight that is determined on, I take them when there's a whole big bag full, and I take it to the Shriners on Southwestern. And the Shriners weigh it, and I don't know how much it is, they never tell me. Bottom line, the money from those tabs goes to local children of the Shriners who need surgery in different hospitals. They pay their whole freight wherever they have to go. So it's an excellent cause. If anybody needs any questions on it, I'm more than available. And I thank you all very much, especially those who have been doing it for a long time. Thank you very much.
Okay, so everyone save your tags from pop cans and soup cans and give them to Alona. Any questions, go to Alona.
Thank you.
Thank you. What a great cause. Anyone? Oh, one more, Mr. O'Brien.
I can talk loud enough.
Okay.
Kudos to Aaron who ran the Fox Run Golf Tournament. Anyone that participated had a great time.
Yes, Aaron Stilinski ran a really cool golf tournament yesterday. I would encourage all of you to sign up for next year. And they'll be posted soon on Facebook if you want to check out the pictures. Great job. And I think Jeff Leamer and Dick Leonard won, right? Congratulations. Okay, I'm starting to sweat. Does anybody else have any more questions? Okay, without further ado, I'll invite Mrs. Dare to announce our speaker. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for being so kind to me on my first day as CEO. Here you go.
Thank you, and congratulations to you.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. It's lovely to see you and to have an opportunity to introduce you to the Executive Director of the International Institute, which many of you already are familiar with, but it's a wonderful group that has been here since I was young, anyhow. Jennifer Rizzo Choi is an ideal person to head the International Institute at this time of real crisis in refugees because of turmoil in the Ukraine, turmoil in the Middle East, turmoil in Africa. So we have an unprecedented number of refugees in Buffalo. And the International Institute is one of the leading organizations taking care of them. She is very well prepared for this task because formerly she was the legal counsel at Journey's End. And we've also had speakers from Journey's End and a direct contact there. So prior to that, Jennifer worked in Washington, D.C. during the Obama administration, and she there worked on human rights issues. And she received her master's degree from MIT and her law degree from UB. So please welcome Jennifer Rizzo Choi.
Good morning. So nice to see such a big full room. Thank you for coming out to chat with us today. I have been asked to talk about refugee and immigrant topics, and happy to sort of go through a presentation, and then I'm also happy to take questions at the end too. Bobby's done a great job going through my background. I just want to note that in all of my travels, one thing that has been constant is I'm actually from this community. I'm from the South Towns, and here with us today is my former first grade teacher who taught me at Allendale Elementary, Mrs. Michelle Hungavel. So I'm so glad she came to see today because I did do a whole lot of reading, and it was because of you that I ended up in this career. And she was also brought with her colleague, Mrs. Graziano, also a teacher at Allendale. So I know there's probably a lot of retired teachers and Southtowners in this audience, so I'm really excited to be here today with all of you. Today we're going to talk about the history and mission of the International Institute. We're going to cover the sort of the legal distinctions between all these different words you hear in the news: refugee, immigrant, asylum seeker, migrant. What does all that mean? And then we're going to talk about how these newcomers are really a big benefit to our community and what they're doing, and how you can get involved and support us. So the International Institute, I don't know if anyone knows of our location. We're on one of the mansions on Delaware Avenue. This is our building right here. Was originally built, this building was built in the late 1800s. We were founded in 1918 and moved into this building around 1970, so we are the longest resident of it. When we were started, we were founded initially as a program of part of the YWCA, because that was at the end of World War I when US soldiers had gone over to Europe to fight, and they had married a good Belgian or German or French girl, and they brought her back here, and those individuals needed to learn English and needed to integrate. And so we started out running programming to support them with their integration process. Over the decades, over our 100-year history, we've also offered classes. In addition to doing like English classes for beginners, we've offered foreign language classes. People have memories of coming to our building to learn Arabic, German, French, Spanish, lots of cultural gatherings, folk dancing festivals, all ways to celebrate the different immigrant groups that have come through our community, because Buffalo has really always been a port of immigrants. One of the things that we're here and I think known for today is our work in refugee resettlement. That really formally began in 1980 with the creation of the 1980 Refugee Act, but we've long been an organization that has done lots of welcoming things. Today we're going to talk about our USP, our unique selling proposition. I would say it's our legacy. We've been around for over a century. We are also, of all the groups in town, we are the only one that is not religiously affiliated. That matters to clients sometimes, because if they're fleeing persecution due to religion, it's nice that we're just neutral and do not have a tie to churches. The kind of work we do does differ from some of the other agencies in town, and we have an enormous cultural impact with the work that we do. So the other agencies in town, one was mentioned, Journey's End. I'm a former employee of theirs, and I started their legal program. My background is that I'm an immigration attorney, so I've represented clients in deportation proceedings, I've represented clients in court. Before that, I had a whole career as a television news reporter as well. So I'm used to interacting with people, interviewing them, finding out their personal stories, and trying to advocate for them. The other agencies in town we all partner with, that's Jewish Family Services, Catholic Charities, and Jericho Road Ministries. And all those agencies in town form something called the Refugee Partnership. And what that means is that we all work together in trying to collectively raise the voice of refugees. And it's a big reason why we have so many refugees coming here, is that we are all here and able to support and receive them. So Buffalo has been in somewhat of a renaissance due to the arrival of these newcomers. Refugee resettlement at the Institute has grown significantly. That's looking at sort of last year's numbers. We usually try to be around 300 new arrivals. 300 means individuals. So family units that could be anything from 120 to 150 family units. We have singles who come, families of 4, all different sizes. Last week we had a family of 14. Yeah, housing was a real hard thing to find. Real hard. We found our housing coordinator is awesome. He managed to rent a whole house. It was technically 10, 2, and 2. It was like the unit was of 10 because any children that are under 18 unmarried are part of the family unit. And I think they had grandma and grandpa, and I think they had an oldest daughter that was married. So, but 10, 2, and 2 coming from Afghanistan. Yeah. So the numbers last year were, sizable but manageable. This year, every year we're asked to start out with what's called our capacity, our ceiling. And we usually try to stay around 300 because that's, for us, for purposes of staffing, that's what's easy to process. Well, the Biden administration has made a very significant commitment to try to increase the number of refugees, and I have a chart to show you in a minute about sort of how the politics of that goes. So this year, the Biden administration has now come back to us 5 different times and asked us to increase our numbers. And when I say us, I mean every resettlement agency around the country has been asked to increase their numbers. So we ended up going to 496. Yep. I had to hire more people. And on top of it, we could be ending this year. So September 30th is the end of our fiscal year. That's the end of the federal fiscal year. We could be ending at 545. And this is not just us. This has happened to the other agencies I just talked about. They have the ability with the contract they sign with all of us to go 10% over. Yeah, I know. It's a lot of people, and they're really pushing through. I think politics has something to do with it because we have an election this fall. So before we talk about sort of the numbers coming in, I want to talk about what we do. Case management. What that means is that, and you guys probably know what case management means because you get some of that here as residents. You know, we help people find their doctor, we get them to their doctor, we get their kids enrolled in school, we find them an apartment or a house. We work with them to learn the American financial system. How do they budget money? How do they get money? We teach them how to use the bus because they're not going to be driving for some time. We teach them how to go to the laundromat and do their clothes. All those things rely on staff as well as volunteers who want to spend time with us. We also have a very successful jobs program where we try to get at least one member of each family unit that's coming employed within 6 months. Sometimes more than one family member, but we definitely want to get that family into the working world and off of welfare. And then we also have specialized medical case management for any people who are coming with problems. So we have moms who get off the plane that are 8 months pregnant. We have people who are in need of dialysis that weren't able to get it where they were in a refugee camp. The whole nine. We've had people show up and within 1 week they were getting open heart surgery where they were prepped and ready for that. We also run an interpretation and translation business. So we've been doing that in our entire existence. If you needed a document translated, like for instance, my grandfather came from Italy and I have his original passport and his birth certificates, we could translate that for you from Italian to English. We can do interpretation in over 100 different languages. So our business actually employs a lot of former clients, former refugees, immigrants, students at the universities, people who are in retirement that grew up speaking a second language. You can come to us and it's a gig job. Like instead of driving an Uber, you can be an interpreter for us. We place people at a lot of medical appointments, court system, police, schools. We do a lot of interpretation work in the schools and we go for testing, speech path evals, etc. And we can do document translation. So we do a lot of birth certificates, marriage certificates, passports. And the other thing we've been doing recently is companies are hiring refugees, people that we're bringing in. They need to have their onboarding documents and their training materials put into the client's language because as people learn English, it takes time to learn English, they still need to know how to do their job. And they can learn better in their own language. So in both ways, we do about $2 million in revenue that we bring in annually from our interpretation business. And it's super awesome because all the profit we make from that, we are able to reinvest into our nonprofit. So it makes us sustainable. And as someone who worked in legal aid, it's really nice that we're able to make money because in legal aid, you never make money, you just lose money. So I love the fact that we're able to bring some income in. We also run a long-running international exchanges and education program. And the thing that we're really well known for that people don't actually know that we do is we run Model UN at all the area high schools. This year's Model UN at UB, it happens usually in March, 800 high school students attended. They were all super excited because of the topics going on in the world today. I don't know if anyone knew that we run Model UN, but I've been trying to tell people that because we've been doing it for 30 years. We also host international visitors, so for people who are internationally minded, we have about 20 different State Department delegations that come in every year. Currently this week there's people here from Poland, but from all over the world who want to go through like our embassies and come here. It's sort of like a conference planning thing. We are able to have visitors come, they can stay in hotels, sometimes they do host visits with families, so if that's something you or your family would be interested in, please let us know because we're always looking for people to mingle with those from around the world. The other thing that we also offer are cultural competency trainings. So I mentioned employers hiring refugees. Well, those employers oftentimes are bringing on, let's say in a factory, a light industrial space, if they hire 10 Burmese refugees and they have a generally American workforce, it's a great thing for us to be able to come in and do a training with the existing staff and talk about what's happening in Burma, what's driving that population here, what are the cultural customs of the people that are your new co-workers. Do they have to leave in the middle of the day to pray outside facing the sun? We go through that as well, and that helps to sort of acculturate as people start working together. So where are refugees and immigrants coming from? Well, Western New York has been a beacon for all kinds of immigrants. It's the reason why we try to refer to ourselves as the Ellis Island of Western New York. The truth of the matter is people used to come through Ellis Island, but then they moved elsewhere. Like my grandfather came through Ellis Island when he was 5 as an Italian immigrant in 1926. But they ended up moving elsewhere. And so today's versions of immigrants and refugees since like the 1980 Refugee Act and forward are coming from places like Vietnam and Bosnia, more recently from Congo, Eritrea, Ethiopia, Iran, Somalia. Also looking at folks in more recent years from Iraq, Burma, Bhutan. And then of course, people who are coming that actually do not have the term of refugee, but you would think of them as refugees, are people from Ukraine and Afghanistan. And I'm gonna talk about that in a few minutes and how they have a different legal distinction. People who are recognized as a refugee internationally, as well as here, under the legal term of it, they have to qualify based on having a claim for persecution. So you have to show that you have a well-founded fear of persecution. Either you experienced it in the past or you are fearing it will happen to you if you remain. You are outside of your homeland and you cannot return home, and the persecution is on account of one of these 5 bases: race, religion, nationality, social group, or political opinion. Notice economic persecution is not on this list. That's a big, important distinction legally because international law does not recognize economic persecution, nor does US law. So people who are leaving their country because they can't feed themselves, that's actually not a basis for legal relief here in this country. And that sometimes gets mixed up because people talk about the fact that people are showing up here because they can't survive in their home country. But international law a long time ago recognized that that persecution would need to be something that's based on something you cannot change about yourself, and economic circumstances are changeable. Or so the legal argument goes. Oops, I just touched a button. Here we go. Okay. So a refugee is someone who is fleeing their country. They are seeking that status to be able to stay in the new country, which means they're seeking resettlement. It means that they have no intention of going home and they cannot go home. If you apply for refugee status in this country, you cannot go back to your home country. If you go back before you are granted US citizenship, you will be stripped of your refugee status. This is not a temporary thing. We're giving you refugee status to stay because you're saying you will die if you go back home. You also, if you are coming into the US as a refugee, you would then be work authorized upon entry. That's because your processing happened overseas. This is a key distinction between this and when I talk about people seeking asylum. Work authorization, when you are allowed permission to work. Our country has tied that to your immigration legal status. So in the refugee resettlement world, okay, so talking about resettlement as in people who are fleeing their country, ending up in a camp overseas or a processing station and waiting to be brought here by the US State Department, that's considered resettlement. That's different than someone who shows up here, crosses the border, and asks for asylum. That's an asylum seeker, okay? Refugee resettlement, as I'm talking about, which is what the Institute has formalized programs to do all that stuff I just talked about, the case management, the medical services. We are one of hundreds of agencies around the country that do this, and since 1990, 2 million refugees have been resettled in the United States. Also, another 800,000 have been granted asylum and are considered asylees. So that may seem like a big number. Let's just go back in time for a minute. In 1980, well, let's go back further. After World War II, the United Nations was formed, and Eleanor Roosevelt, one of my favorite people, was our delegate to the United Nations, and they signed the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And then from there, what spelled down were all the conventions, the Geneva Conventions, which formed international law related to the protection of individuals. And it was recognized at that time that since 6 to 8 million people had to flee because they were Jewish and they were being persecuted, it was recognized that there needed to be protections for people to be able to go to other countries if they couldn't stay in their homeland. So that created the international doctrine of humanitarian law. From there, every single nation state that signed those conventions had to incorporate it into their law. So it took from like 1951, which was the UN Protocol of Refugee, all the way down to 1980 for us to have our own laws related to accepting refugees. 1980 is when we started doing it officially, and so by 1990 is when they started to count. So, okay, 2 million sounds like a lot of people, except the United Nations today says that there are over 40 million refugees registered with them worldwide. So we've accepted 2 million people in 30 years. And we are one of the larger refugee receiving nations. This is the process for one to become a refugee if you go through the resettlement process. It's long. This can take years, depending on where you meet the person, like what population they've come from. If you look, so people coming from Afghanistan have had somewhat of an expedited process. They're looking at 1 to 3 years. A lot of the African nations, they average about 8 to 10 years waiting for a spot. I have met children who are Burmese who were born in a camp and they came here at age 20. All they knew was a refugee camp. So it really depends because these numbers are decided by the US government. Just like every other nation that accepts refugees, what is your ceiling? How many will you accept? If we're only accepting in 40,000 a year, you may be on a waiting list for a very long time to come here. You have to go through all these steps, security clearances, medical screenings, you have to be vaccinated, etc. It takes a long time. These are the top 5 receiving states of refugees for resettlement in our country. New York is one of the largest resettlers. When I say New York, I do not mean New York City, I mean Buffalo. Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, Utica, Albany. Upstate New York has had a huge renaissance in refugee resettlement. New York City is too high of a cost of living area, and the US government sends the same amount of money, no matter if you're going to Buffalo or Indiana or California. So it's the same amount of money, they want to stretch it to go farther, and places like Buffalo have affordable housing, we have jobs that need to be worked, and we have a welcoming community. Going back to the legal doctrines, right? So 1980 is when we started out with refugee resettlement as a program. Those numbers were very large back then, the ceiling. The ceiling is what's set by our president. So it's a political determination. And that's why this is always in the news, because the president who's elected decides how many will be let in. It's an executive decision. So you can see beginning in 1980, there was a commitment to honoring and bringing in people. And then over the years, it's kind of ebbed and flowed. And we've had sort of 2 major hits to the system. One was 9/11. All travel had stopped at that time. And so the purple line is the number of people who actually came in. We never actually meet the ceiling, which is the blue number, but the government processing system and all the case managers and officers and doctors and people that deal with refugees, they try to staff up to be able to handle the ceiling. So 9/11 was the first bump. Trump was the second one, and it was actually a bigger hit to the system than 9/11 because Trump took, he froze travel, he put in a Muslim ban, an African ban overall, and then he stopped the process for 90 days. And what means is that everybody's travel clearances, their medical clearances, those all timed out. And so the last 4 years under Biden has been about building back up to admit more people. So that you see how the blue line goes up to have a higher ceiling. And I just said to you before, we were doing 300 people a year and now we're going to be doing 500. That's because we're getting a lot of pressure from the Biden administration to do more. Because they're trying to go back up and reach the ceiling, and then we're going to see what happens come fall. I have no idea. On my side of things, I run a business, and I worry about hiring a bunch of people that I then have to lay off. So it's sort of like, there's only so much you can ask of somebody at one time. We're trying to help people, but we also don't want to have these economic hits to our operation and have it really impact us while they try to figure out what they want to do on a national level. Asylum seekers, also sometimes called migrants in the news, have also been a very big topic, both nationally and locally. It started about 2 years ago with some of the southern governors, especially the governor of Texas, sending people on a bus as they crossed the border and shipping them northward. And all this political stuff came about because Biden had eventually dropped some of the border and enforcement stuff that Trump had in place, so there were more people coming across the border. And so this became a thing where you saw in the news, busloads of people were showing up in New York City, Philadelphia, Martha's Vineyard, Chicago, etc. New York City got a lot of people. The busloads aren't happening anymore. They've stopped some time ago. There were lawsuits, and all of it is paused. But what ended up happening is that New York City ended up with 80,000 people in shelters. New York City also had years ago enacted a local ordinance that promised that they would provide housing to anyone who was in need of housing, like temporary housing. That meant that that ordinance, as I understand, was enacted for their regular homeless population. It was not intended for foreign-born people who had just arrived. So they suddenly had to support housing not just for their regular homeless population, but also for all of these arriving asylum seekers, people who had not gone through the refugee resettlement process. They had just shown up. No judgment there. They may not have been able to go through the refugee resettlement process, but they had just shown up. So then what happened last year, if you remember in our news, is that New York City decided to start sending those busloads and redirecting them, and they sent some to Buffalo and Albany and Rochester. So then all of these cities that have refugees for resettlement started also having hotels that were full of migrants, which has been a whole separate issue that has been asked upon our local agencies to try to support and serve. Busing from the border does not solve this problem. Shipping people around is not a humanitarian way of doing things, and it's just passing the buck when, quite frankly, I could talk for hours about the fact that our immigration system is broken and needs to be fixed, because we're not dealing with the actual problem, which is migration flows and the root causes in other countries. But regardless, what was happening is that local communities suddenly had to handle people showing up. So an asylum seeker is someone who could go to a port of entry, like an airport, or they may not go to a port of entry. They may cross like the border, as you hear about, like in news stories. But there's someone who, once they are on US soil, are asking for asylum to become a refugee, which is why they didn't get the refugee resettlement process, the caseworker, all the support. They started their process here. And if you remember what I've mentioned before, a refugee for resettlement may have waited anywhere from 3 to 20 years in a camp, but when they walk in the door, they get services, support, and their work authorized. That's different from an asylum seeker who did not wait, and so their process for waiting begins on US soil. That's the key distinction, because it's tied to work authorization. And that's where a lot of the stressors have come. So if you are seeking asylum, you have 12 months to apply. Technically, you can apply after it, but if you don't apply within the 12-month window, it becomes legally nearly impossible to be granted. You do not get work permission right away. You file your asylum application, which is a complex application, then you have to wait 150 days, and then you can file your work permit, and that takes another several months to come in the mail. So logistically speaking, if you show up on day one today and say, I am seeking asylum in this country, you won't have a work permit for about a year. So you have to have a way that you can, who's going to pay for where you live and your food and all those things. That's where this structural problem comes in. The asylum application is long. It's very similar to the refugee application. It's just, who's helping you and where are you doing it? Are you doing it overseas or are you doing it here? It's in English, a lot of difficult challenges. It's not an application you want to fill out by yourself. I've represented many people on asylum. It's about 80 to 100 hours of legal work if you want to do a successful application. Every single person I have represented for asylum has been granted asylum. I have a 100% success rate, but I also only take cases I know that I can win, and a big part of it is, well, I'm a lawyer. You can't fight a case for asylum if you don't have the right documentation, and you have to meet that legal definition I just talked about. So it is not an easy case to win. Most people are applying on their own pro se. And the grant rate is quite low. We're looking at like an under 30% grant rate. So all these people that are coming and applying are not going to get it in the end. Also not helpful if they don't speak English and they don't have a lawyer. Why should you care about what's going on? Well, I mean, in addition to the fact that you're just a human and these are other humans, and pretty much I would think that every single person in this room is connected to people who came here at some point, probably on a boat, maybe on a plane, right? All of our generations past came from somewhere. But beyond that, today's folks who are coming are going to be part of our neighborhood and community. They are revitalizing our community, our city. They are contributing to population growth in Buffalo. 10% of the city of Buffalo is now foreign-born. 7% of Erie County. They are business owners. They are employees at companies. We have firms that are coming to us asking to hire our clients because they are only able to run 2 shifts and they want to run 3 shifts, but they don't have the workers. There's over 3,000 business owners, immigrant business owners, new entrepreneurs in the Buffalo metro area. Someone who is an immigrant is almost 40% more likely than a US born person to start a business. A big part of that is credentialing. It's easier to come here, like we have folks who are coming here who are doctors in their home countries, nurses, accountants, airline stewardesses, mechanics. We had a bunch of airline mechanics, airplane mechanics come from Afghanistan. Depending on the credentialing, you may not be able to get back into your field that you have been trained in. No one asks to become a refugee. If you became a refugee, it's because your country fell apart. You didn't want to leave your home that you bought and built. You didn't want to leave your community and your church and your friends and all those things. So if you're coming here, you have to start all over again. Some people were able to get right back into their fields, especially if it's like math skills, like that's a universal language, right? But others, like we've had several doctors, they end up going through a re-credentialing process and they become a nurse or a med tech or someone who works in a hospital. They're just not able to go through that process again, and a medical degree in Afghanistan is not the same as a medical degree in the United States. And so a lot of people then, if they're smart and sophisticated, say, I'm gonna open a business instead. So you'll find that a lot of people who run businesses tend to be immigrants. Talking about sort of the negative stuff you hear in the news, they should come here legally is a big one I hear all the time. Well, I think I just explained, hopefully, why not everyone's able to. The process is also very cumbersome to get legal status. So if our politics could maybe move forward, we can work at a way of, instead of just putting more agents at the border, looking at ways to make that adjudication system go faster. The people who come here really do want to pay for themselves. They do not want to be a charity case. They want to get moving and they want to contribute. Everybody who does come here, at some point, once they start interacting with the U.S. immigration system, will be vetted. They go through a lot of security screenings. You are vetted. It's the most highly vetted population on earth, and the U.S. does deport regularly people who have security clearance issues or aren't able to be able to stay here due to concerns. Some of the other myths, like these countries are emptying their prisons and sending them here. That's really not the case at this time. That may have been the case years ago, but that is not the case today. Immigrants are less likely to commit crimes than U.S. born Americans. There's been a whole bunch of studies done, especially by even conservative think tanks like the Cato Institute, to sort of counter this myth that people coming here is a bad thing. There's actually just been such a huge contribution on them. One of the big objections is the drain on our federal benefits and the economy. Well, in fact, they've contributed more than they cost us. So there was a long study that was done for about 15 years on refugees that came through resettlement and asylees. And they looked at, they totaled up all the numbers, like how much money did they get in welfare and nonprofits like us, et cetera, and they put that in. And then they looked at how much are they contributing to the tax rolls and to property taxes, et cetera. And what they found is that there was a fiscal net benefit of $31 billion. Refugees and immigrants contributed more. After all these expenses were paid, it was $30 billion more by coming here and contributing to our economy. The net benefit for state and local was $92 billion. These numbers are not like my numbers. These are numbers done by the US government to look at, because I will go back to that World War II, our humanitarian commitments, Eleanor Roosevelt, what do we want to do as a nation? When we set up our humanitarian obligations, there wasn't a look at how is this going to benefit us economically. At the time, it was more so a pledge to try to repair the world and to sort of do our part of that. And so no one ever thought there would be an economic benefit from bringing in refugees. But what we've now found, especially in the last 2 decades, is that they are a big contributor to our workforce. And there's actually an economic driver that makes it worthwhile to do. So the labor force in 2033, 10 years from now, will be larger by 5.2 million people, and that's mostly due to higher net immigration. That's a good thing because we have a declining birth rate in this country. Our GDP is going to be greater by about 7 trillion because of people who are coming in, who are new arrivals. It's really no different today than it was in the day that like my grandfather came in 1926. Italians were showing up then by the boatload because they also wanted to work and there were jobs to be had at that time. And my great-grandfather went to work in the coal mines, as did many people's parents at that time. So same thing. It's just, it's a different group of individuals, but it's the same story of people coming, seeking a place that they can have that's safe for them, that's home for them, where they can contribute. In closing, just wanting to talk about how you can help. There's a bunch of different things you can do. I mean, certainly donating to us is a great thing because that allows us to be flexible with how we support our clients. Donating goods, specifically furniture, dishwares, microwaves. We set up, for bringing in 525 people this year, we're probably gonna do about 300 apartment setups. It's a lot of apartments. It's a lot of beds, it's a lot of kitchen tables and chairs and things. We try to never buy those things. We try to repurpose and save the small amount of money we get from the federal government. We try to save that to pay for things like internet, get people set up with their security deposit and their first and second month's rent so they get a start before they get a job here. So anytime we can save money, we ask for people to donate goods. You can volunteer. I mentioned the International Visitors Program. That's a great way to host and be involved in international happenings. You can also mentor refugees. People really benefit from a lot of one-on-one attention, especially if you spend time with them explaining personal finances, budgeting, laundromat, buses, etc. You can also come to events. We do host different events like this with education, our annual fundraisers in the fall. That's a lot of fun. I guess I'll just close with saying that I hope I've gone through some of the basic stuff that's been happening and the different legal statuses, but I'll open it up to questions now and see if anyone has questions about what I've covered or about immigration topics overall. I see a hand back there, with the pink and the jean jacket.
If you're able to accept, let's say, donations like furniture, do you arrange to pick up the item or does the person donating?
So it's a great question. So if it's a small item, you've got dishwares and microwaves and things, we'd ask that you could just bring it to our office. We have a storage unit in the back. We have a carriage house actually in the back of our property that takes those things. If you have bigger items like furniture, I was just talking to a gentleman here about it. We work with local movers. We will rent a day worth of movers, a 3-man team in a truck. And so we try to be strategic about it. So if you have a house full of stuff or a room full of stuff, we'll try to do a Southtown sweep and get all of that at the same time. So we can come get it from you. Just, it may not be like tomorrow. It may be, we'll plan it out within a couple of weeks to be cost conscious. So yes, we can come get it. Yes.
What an enlightening talk you gave us, Jennifer. Excuse me. I was especially impressed to see the charts with the benefits of immigrants. Would you have that in a handout?
The benefits, you mean like the types of food stamps, Medicaid, that type of thing?
No, I mean the benefits to our community.
Oh, handout. Yeah, my communications director who's nodding back there, Gabe, you can raise your hand. Gabe DeMayo is our communications guy. He can produce something. I can share something with Bobby. This presentation we have on a PowerPoint too, but we do have some sort of quick reference things that we hand out to try to counter the negative things that people say about refugees and immigrants to sort of, just quick points. So that's a great idea. We can send something over. Yes, looks like back there first with the hand. The woman with the white shirt.
So when someone comes here from another country, let's say to Buffalo, they're on the way to citizenship?
So they could be, but it's a long journey. It depends on how they entered and what their legal status is, and then that will determine if they have a pathway to citizenship or not. So a refugee who's granted that status overseas and they come here as a resettlement refugee, they can become a U.S. citizen within 5 years if they learn English and they can pass the civics test. If they come as an asylum seeker or a migrant, first they have to apply for asylum, then be granted asylum, and then it's a 5-year process to get to citizenship, as long as they also learn English and pass the civics test.
And does everybody stay in the area that they came to? I know it's a, it was a big move, but there's, 7 feet of snow sometimes.
Yeah, that's a good point, because also another donation that we seek, I didn't talk about, because it's not that time of year, but we actually do seek donated winter jackets and boots and things, because every client that gets off an airplane, we have to give them one, and there's a lot of kids, so kids' boots, kids' jackets. So it's interesting, a lot of people choose to stay in Buffalo. We are a city of secondary migration as well, so there's people who come initially for resettlement, who are placed here and they find it welcoming and they stay. It's welcoming because we're nice, welcoming people, but there's also their communities already here. We have a sizable Congolese community, Afghan, Iraqi, etc. So they find it supportive, right? There's community centers, mosques, churches, ethnic groups. They already have that. There's also restaurants. We are also a place of secondary migration where people who are resettled elsewhere, for instance, they've been resettling a lot of Burmese in Indiana, people get resettled in Texas. They oftentimes, if they have family members here, those folks will then move here, and those are referred to as secondary migrants. I think New York State as a whole is more supportive because our state and our elected leadership a while ago recognized that there's been such a gain by refugees coming and immigration, and they've been supportive of nonprofits. So as an example, during the Trump years, when that big graphic showed the big hit, the New York State Assembly and House stepped in and they appropriated money just to go to agencies like ours, specifically just to protect us. So we didn't, because if we laid off all our staff, we would have been starting again from zero. And that money that they passed, they protected about $3 million in the state budget. It kept our 4 agencies in town open. And that was significant because over 100 resettlement agencies had to close their doors during the Trump years. 4 years of that administration closed over 100 different locations. So I think all of that combined means, I talked about the refugee partnership and the 5 agencies. If you're going to Texas and you get your 90 days of help from your agency, because that's what the federal government pays for. They pay for a caseworker for 90 days. That might be all you get in Texas or Alabama or wherever else. And then people hear about here, you can come to my organization. You can, depending on what program you will qualify for, you could have services from us for 5 years. We have a range of, and that's because of New York State, that's because of this community being supportive, and it's not just my agency. There's the West Side Bazaar exists, it helps immigrants who are starting small businesses. There's Stitch Buffalo that helps with people who have sewing skills, who have no professionalized skills, but they can go into sewing and get a job at like New Era Cap, which does all the sewing for professional baseball caps. So we have like a very good ecosystem here, I guess is my point, where do people choose to leave? Yes, they choose to leave, but we have by far more in migration because of the support and setup that we have here.
So they are allowed to leave?
Everyone has their own choice, yes.
Thank you.
Yes, and we have 2 questions up here, it looks like. She's first, yes.
How many individuals do you believe that are refugees that come to Buffalo that don't go through your program, that are walking around Buffalo and, not doing anything for themselves? How many people do you think there are?
It's a hard number to quantify. I can give you a couple of numbers I know. So for instance, Jericho Road runs a shelter, and it's largely for asylum seekers, and they have 120 beds in that shelter, and those have been historically occupied for the last 3 years, where they have not had space. So those are people who are coming on their own, and they're here, and they're making their case for asylum, and as I mentioned, it can take several years to get a decision. Beyond that, we also had the busloads that were moved from New York City to Buffalo, and that started at about 600, its population is 600. Today, I think it's around 550. So that's another group of individuals who are wading through a process. So I would guess there's somewhere to 700 to 1,000 people here who did not come through refugee resettlement that are trying to make their way through a process. But I can't tell you for sure because there's no census data kept in that. People are they're going to be forced by the system to do something because charity is not going to extend forever. No one can pay your rent, and you can't just live forever for free somewhere. So you're going to need to file those papers, go every day in court, and try to get an answer. I have a question all the way in the back.
Well, I just wanted to point out that there is a company that makes crackers in Buffalo. Total Seed, I think it is. It's the seed company. And they specialize in hiring refugees and asylum seekers because they have found that they are such good workers. And so they have just recently doubled, more than doubled, I think. They started out like in a room like this making crackers, and now they have a building that makes crackers. So it just kind of points out what you said. People want to work.
People want to work, and you know, people who lost the ability to, like, it's really hard for our adult refugees, less so for the kids, but you know, you have to really have a lot of humility because you come here and you're in welfare level housing. You know, you have to go learn English. A lot of times your kids are learning English faster and picking it up at school than you are. You have to go to some type of manual job, you know, and start over at a factory when you had your own business or you were a teacher. It's hard for people to have to do all that over again. What they want most is to be able to make money, save it, have nobody take it from them, and they're going to buy their own house and get their kids to school. And that's a real driven work ethic that we see in all of our clients.
Jennifer, at what point do the people get into the Social Security system, get driver's license, and I know when they become citizens they can vote, not before. But is there like a time frame where all these things happen so they can work?
Sure. So it depends on the population. So resettlement refugees, people who waited in line overseas, when they get here on day one, I mentioned work authorization, they also get a Social Security number right away, because with work authorization comes Social Security card. They're fully legal and can do whatever they need to do. They're also they're eligible right away for public benefits. Most refugees that are through resettlement, I mean, pretty much everybody, we enroll immediately in welfare, Medicaid, and food stamps. And then the goal is to get that family off of welfare supports within 3 to 6 months, because we want usually it's the father, but the top income earner in the household, the one most likely to be employed, to get employed. Asylum seekers, it's a different story. You can't get a Social Security card if you are not work authorized. So you have to first file for asylum, then wait to get that work authorization, then get the Social Security card. Again, delays for like a year. So there's no Social Security card for them. Driver's licenses is a different thing. So we take everybody that's our resettlement client down to the DMV, usually within the first week or two. Like there's a whole bunch of things that have to happen after people get off an airplane. We are there to greet every arrival too. And a lot of times it's been happening at night lately. So we have a case manager that'll be there if it's 2 a.m. to pick up the family. We're taking that family that's coming for resettlement to an apartment that's been set up for them already, largely by a group of volunteers. Or if it's a family of 14 and we don't have a house yet, we're putting them in a hotel. And then we move them to the apartment we've set up. But we then, within the next several days, are taking them to their first doctor's appointment, getting that relationship established, getting the kids down to school registration, doing that part of the process, taking them to the DMV to get their New York State identification card. People who want to get a driver's license have to have enough money saved to be able to buy a car. And in today's day and age, buying a car, even a used one, is expensive. So you don't see refugees driving for a while because of that big impediment. Most people who, even if they had personal wealth before coming here, the refugee journey depletes all of that. When you're a refugee and you're fleeing your country, you're spending whatever remaining funds you have on food and things, or wherever your temporary stay is. You also oftentimes lose access to your identification cards and access to banks and things. So you end up here starting at zero. Even if you had wealth, you start at zero. So a car doesn't happen for, on the fast end, I've seen people have a car within a year or two, but usually you see people getting a car within 3 to 5 years. And it is such a point of pride when someone has a car. And that's another thing where I talked about these communities, why would you stay here? Well, if you're Congolese and you're coming here, there's people who've been here before you, they have cars. And they're taking people from their neighborhood to grocery shop and whatever, do things that they need to do. I mean, you know, that's where, why would you go to another city where you don't have that support and help? We don't help people get cars. We, of course, are looking for anyone who can do mentoring. That's why I talked about personal finance, savings, credit, helping people understand those concepts so they can get on their own personal journey to establishing their own family's security and self-sufficiency. But cars don't happen right away, and that is why one of those core skills that we teach in the first 90 days is how to use the bus, how to use an ATM, where's your nearest store, how do you get your kids to school. We literally have interns whose job it is to take people back and forth on the bus so they learn from your house to school, from your house to work, from your house to the grocery store. Those are all key skills that are taught. And it's very similar, quite frankly, to what we did back in 1920 when we first started, helping people figure those basic things out.
We have just time for one more question.
I was in the vending business for 25 years, so I had vending machines in countless companies. Consistently, I heard over and over again, the best employees they had were refugees. They were from Guatemala, Laos, Vietnam, Brazil, and a few other countries. And they said the only two things the people wanted were to work as many hours as they could and to have time off to go to church. I consistently heard that at every place I went, that they were the best employees, they were reliable, they showed up every day, and all they wanted to be, they just wanted to be treated fairly.
Thank you for that. I would say that that's the same thing for us with
Jennifer,
our
I
clients.
think you recognize now that people are very interested and very supportive of what you're doing, and we appreciate your coming, and it's just a little tribute to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.